Alrighty, so it's time to once again do the preview in terms of the weekend's action this week in MLS, as we are now up to match week number 14. And as always, we got 13 games that's going to be happening this weekend's action. Although what's interesting about this weekend's action is that it's kind of evenly distributed, where there's going to be 8 games that's going to be taking place on Saturday and 5 games that is going to be taking place on Sunday. And in this preview, I'll look at the first 8 games that's going to be taking place on Saturday. And then tomorrow, after when the Atlanta versus Columbus game is over, I'll look at the 5 Sunday game that is going to happen. And, I can of course do that because both of these games actually has a bit of a gap between when this game ends and when this game, of course, kicks off. In fact, with this being the only matinee game of the Saturday action. In terms of the nightcap action, it's the usual where there's tons of game that is kind of jammed in together, and this time it seems like that busy time is going to be 8 p.m. Eastern and 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, where I think there's going to be like 4 games that's going to be taking place at the same time. And also because there is a Quakes game this week, that means I am going to be attending that one, and that does make it difficult for me to not being able to watch a lot of these other games, because when I go to a Quakes game, I do still keep track of other MLS action, but I only are able to do one of those games because I only have my phone and I can only watch one game at a time. And unless if ESPN Plus is going to introduce the option where you can watch multiple game in a single screen, then yeah, that unfortunately is going to be the limitation that I have whenever I attend a Quakes game. But that being said, let us actually go back to talking about the first game of this weekend's action, which, as I mentioned, it's Atlanta United versus the Columbus Crew, as this game will start at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff will be 3:38 p.m. local time, which I believe this game is also going to be on national television, and it's going to be on ESPN. And for Atlanta, despite the fact that they definitely play probably the best soccer that they've been playing in a while in that game against FC Cincinnati, they didn't get a win in that one. They drew 1-1 in that game, which extend their franchise long winless run to now at 9 games. Well, for Columbus, they drew 0-0 against Nashville SC at home in a game where they're definitely going to be kicking themselves the fact that they didn't get all 3 points, because for most part of that game, they were definitely the better team and they had tons of opportunity to score. But a combination of Joe Willis being just an unstoppable force, and also some miss opportunity and some terrible miss was the reason why Columbus weren't able to get all 3 points. And in fact, for Columbus, in the last 5 games, it's been kind of a struggle to get all 3 points, because besides they did win 2-1 against NYCFC, they drew 2-2 against FC Cincinnati in the Hell is Real Derby, drew 2-2 against New England in the first ever game at Lower.com Field, and then drew 0-0 against Austin FC on the road. Now for Atlanta, they drew 1-1 against FC Cincinnati, lost 1-0 to New England, which turns out to be the last game that Gabriel Heinze took charge of this team. And then of course they drew 2-2 against Nashville, lose 3-0 to Chicago, and then drew 0-0 against the New York Red Bulls. And it's going to be very interesting to see who, of course, is looking to trying to snap out of the little flunk that they have been in. Well, for Atlanta, they're definitely hoping that they can finally end this winless run. And if they can play like what they did in that last game against FC Cincinnati, they definitely could have a chance to do so, because they're playing a Columbus team that, unsurprisingly this season, they have not been doing relatively well on the road. Now, I will say also with Columbus, as they're starting to get a little bit healthy, I would expect this team should look much better than the current state that they have. And I think the only reason why a lot of people hasn't really criticized Columbus and haven't criticized Caleb Porter of a slow start that the Crew has been in is because they've been battling with tons of injuries. But once those injuries are going to be no longer the issue, and once they start to get back healthy, you expect this Crew team to look much better and maybe have a second half resurgence. Because if that's not going to be the case, then yeah, there should be some criticism. And that I just kind of feel like this is kind of a team that what I thought in the beginning of this season, that I worry where they're going to have kind of an MLS Cup hangover, and maybe this is kind of the case right now with them not doing well so far this year, and have looked nowhere near as the Crew team that they were last season. So yeah, we shall see who, of course, could get a big win in this one. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is the Chicago Fire versus TFC. So this game will be the first of, as I mentioned, I think 4 games. It's going to be taking place right around the same time. This game will start at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff will be 7:08 p.m. local time. Chicago, of course, drew 2-2 to DC United at home, and that was a very frustrating 2-2 draw because for the majority of the game, they were leading in that one. They were leading 2-0 heading into the last 10 minutes, and then they gave up 2 goals in the last 10 minutes to drew 2-2 in that game. While for Toronto, they have had back-to-back 1-1 draw at home, and in terms of the last 5 games for both of these teams, I talked about how the Chicago Fire, you thought that maybe they turn a corner after getting a couple of victories like against Atlanta United and Orlando City, and they also played to an incredible 3-3 draw against the Philadelphia Union. Yeah, reality basically came back to them because after that 3-0 win against Atlanta, they got absolutely smacked out of the door by Nashville SC by losing 5-1 in that game. And then, as I mentioned, they had a very frustrating 2-2 draw against DC United. For TFC, as I mentioned, they had back-to-back 1-1 draw, first drawing 1-1 to the Red Bulls, then drawing 1-1 to Orlando City. They did win 3-2 on the road against New England, but before that, it was a 7-1 loss against TFC, but that was the last game that Chris Armas was in charge of this team. And then they lost 2-0 they lost 2-0 against FC Cincinnati on the road. But certainly, for TFC, they started to turn the corner a little bit and started to try to maybe reignite the second half resurgence. But that being said, these back-to-back draws, especially at home, this is not going to be enough for them to try to charge themselves back up the Eastern Conference table, because it's one thing to have draws when you're, of course, are playing on the road and getting points, but when you start to draw games at home, then it also kind of means that you're dropping points, and that I just feel like draws is not going to be enough for this team to try to charge up the table, and that they need to start winning games. So yeah, we'll see whether or not if they can, of course, do so, and they have a good opportunity to do so in this game against a Fire team that, like I said, it feels like this has started to look like the Fire team that we saw in the beginning of the season, which, yeah, that Fire team from the beginning of the season was literally the worst team in the league. So if you're a Chicago Fire fan, you better hope that things can maybe turn around, or else they're going to be go back to where they were in the beginning of the season, which is near the bottom of the Eastern Conference. But now moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be Minnesota versus the Portland Timbers. So this game will also kick off at 7:08 p.m. local time, and it will start at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And both of these teams actually come up with a big victory at home, with Minnesota becoming the only team right now in MLS that was able to beat the Seattle Sounders and actually snap the Sounders' 13-game unbeaten run to begin the season by winning 1-0 at home. While for the Timbers, they won 2-1 against LAFC at home, and it was courtesy of a last-minute goal that they score against LAFC to get all 3 points at home. In terms of the last 5 games for Minnesota, obviously ever since that 0-4 start, this team has no doubt turned around their season. They won 1-0, as I mentioned, to the Seattle Sounders. They did lose 2-0 to Colorado, which was kind of a little bit of a speed bump in terms of their resurgence ever since they start 0-4 to start the season, because before that, it was a 2-2 draw against the Quakes at home, a 1-0 win against the Timbers the last time both of these teams met, and then a 2-0 win against Austin FC at home. Now for the Timbers, they also kind of are starting to turn a corner after kind of a disaster kind of run that they had 2 weeks ago. They won 2-1 against LAFC, then winning 1-0 against Dallas, but the disaster was when they lost 4-1 against Austin FC on the road, lost 1-0 at home against Minnesota, and then drew 2-2 against the Houston Dynamo, and there was also a couple of more draws and losses they suffered before that. But either way, this should be a very good match, and that, I'm definitely confident that the Loons can beat the Timbers again, because Minnesota tends to have a very good record when they play against the Portland Timbers, both at home and also on the road. But that being said, this is a Timbers side that has started to get a little bit healthy and started to get a couple of guys that was on international duty with their club to be back in the starting 11, and there's no doubt that this is going to be a tougher task for the Loons to be able to beat a Timbers side compared to the last time when both of these teams were able to meet against each other. So yeah, we'll just see who, of course, could potentially get the win in this game. But now moving on into the next match on this board, and the last match before I switch boards, is FC Dallas versus the LA Galaxy. So this is a matchup between both teams that actually have met each other not long ago. It was a couple of weeks ago where the Galaxy were able to win 3-1 against FC Dallas, but now Dallas is able to get to play at home against the Galaxy in this game, as this one will start at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff will not start until 7:38 p.m. local time. For Dallas, yeah, they are now winless in 4 games and have lost 3 in a row. And, Dallas is kind of in that territory where it's getting close to where it's a lost season for them. And, I don't want to kind of say it with a team, especially the fact that we're actually not even halfway through the season, but with the way how they've been in an incredible free fall ever since the beginning of the season, and they've been stuck near the bottom of the Western Conference table with no signs of them potentially improve. This has started to really become a lost season, and they continue to lose a couple more games in a row, then they are really got themselves in that territory where they might as well just kind of look forward to next season and just kind of shut things down and just maybe finish the season on a respectable note, but pretty much they probably have no shot in terms of making the playoffs. Now, that would be the opposite to say about the Galaxy, who, they are right now in the playoff position, but there have definitely started to be some holes that it started to kind of comes into this Galaxy team, and there's also no doubt that they have come back down to earth after their good start, as in the last game they drew 2-2 against RSL away, and in fact in the last 5 games, besides that 2-2 draw, they lost 2-1 against the Vancouver Whitecaps on the road. They did win 3-1 against FC Dallas, but they also lost 2-0 against SKC, and they did win 3-1 against the Quakes in the Cali Clasico, but that was the last time that Chicharito was in the starting 11. Now, I will also say that it's easy to say that the reason why the Galaxy hasn't really been doing that well lately is because of Chicharito not being in the starting 11, but I think maybe the real reason why there is maybe some concern if you're a Galaxy fan with some of the way that they have been going through this little rough patch is the fact that the defense started to look like hot garbage again. And, I think this season, when you look at this Galaxy defense, I would say they kind of have improved, but how much is that due to the fact that Jonathan Bond was making some big save game after game? And, there's no doubt that Jonathan Bond has had an incredible season, and he's definitely going to be in contention to not only be the goalkeeper of the year, but maybe even being the newcomer of the year by the end of the season. But there's no doubt that his form has really cooled off in the last couple of games, and when he wasn't able to make those crucial saves that he has been doing for the majority of the first part of the season, you started to see that the Galaxy defense are starting to expose, and that yeah, I mean, when you look at their defensive performance in these last couple of games, it has not been good whatsoever. So yeah, that's going to be something that I think Galaxy fans are going to be a little bit concerned. But that being said, if they are going to get Chicharito back, which I actually have no idea when they're going to get him back, I'm assuming maybe this is going to be the game that they get him back. But once they get him back, they would have a chance to get themselves back into winning ways. In fact, this is a game that they could definitely get themselves back to winning ways too, because they're facing a Dallas team that, as I said, this season it's been a complete disaster for this team, and there's no doubt that Dallas is one of those teams that is among the most disappointing team this season, because, I knew this team was maybe going to be a bubble team in the playoffs, but I did not expect this team to be as bad as they have been this season, being a team that has just been a non-factor whatsoever, and has been pretty much been bad ever since the first game of the season. But now, I am now going to switch boards and look at the last 4 games that's going to be happening in terms of the Saturday night action. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is none other than the USL derby between Nashville SC versus FC Cincinnati. And, the reason why I say this is the USL derby is because these are 2 former USL teams that actually play against each other in the playoffs. And I also said when both of these teams met in the first game of the season, they do not like each other whatsoever. And I expect this should be another very competitive game between both of these teams. And coming into this game will also start the same time as the last one that I mentioned, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff will not start until 7:38 p.m. local time. Nashville, of course, they are unbeaten in the last games. Well, for FC Cincinnati, they drew 1-1 to Atlanta United at home, and that their record is now 3-4-6. While Nashville, their record is 5-8-1, and they continue to pretty much continue their reputation as the draw kings of MLS, because I think right now they, alongside with Atlanta United, has had the most draws so far for this season. Now, in the last 5 games, they drew 0-0 against Columbus on the road before winning 5-1 against the Chicago Fire. Then draw 2-2 against Atlanta United. They did win 1-0 against the Philadelphia Union before drawing 1-1 against Montreal at home. For FC Cincinnati, they drew 1-1 against Atlanta United. Then they were able to win, or actually no, they didn't win. They lost 5-4 against Montreal in probably a game that, you know, I really wish I was able to talk about that game, because that was probably one of the craziest games I've ever seen in MLS. And, you know, it's unfortunate the fact that Cincinnati were not only leading twice in that game, but both times they were up 2 goals and ultimately blew that to lose 5-4 in that one. Then they drew 2-2 against Columbus before drawing 1-1 against the Houston Dynamo, and then winning 2-0 against TFC in this one. And, you know, again, there's no doubt that despite some of the heartbreak that FC Cincinnati has suffered in the past couple of games, they have definitely started to reach their target of what I think a lot of Cincinnati fans are hoping this team to be, which is at least be a respectable team and not a wooden spoon kind of team. But that being said, you know, the way that they have reached the level of at least being respectable and not being a punching bag also means that they have had a lot of games where they have blow late leads, and that's going to be something that I think Cincinnati is going to have to resolve, because, you know, this is I know this might be something that might be the next step that they have, but this is also something that I think fans in general want them to have, where it's got to be very painful that games after games where they were leading in the game and you probably know that lead is not going to stand, and especially even when they're up multiple goal, they still somehow find a way to not get a win at the end of the 90 minutes, and that's going to be something that I think that they're going to have to resolve. And not to mention, you know, the last time when they did play against Nashville SC, yeah, that was the game where they were up 2-0 and then they blew that lead, and was very fortunate they were able to get a 2-2 draw. And there's no doubt, you know, in a Nashville standpoint, they definitely want to get a win in this game. And I know Nashville right now is doing very well, and they're actually 3rd in the standings, but you look at the remaining of their schedule and they have a lot of road games, and I even hear that they actually have the toughest schedule for the remaining of the season. You know, they need to start, of course, getting some wins. And, you know, I also mentioned before of how, you know, when you look at how many points that they drop at home this season, if they don't do well on the road, which at least right now they seem to do relatively well on the road, as them only losing 1 game on the road in the 5 road games that they have this season. But let's say if things does take a turn to the worst and that they do face against those tough team on the road, yeah, you wonder, are those home points are going to come back to haunt them when they weren't able to get all 3 points. And in this one, they're definitely looking to try to get all 3 points and try not to also dig themselves into a 2-0 hole like they did last time against FC Cincinnati. But either way, this should be a very, very good match. And that, again, anytime when both of these teams play against each other, you know there's going to be something interesting that's going to happen. But now moving on into the next match on this board is another rivalry game between RSL versus the Colorado Rapids, as this is the Rocky Mountain Cup between both of these teams. As this game will start at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff will not start until 8:08 p.m. local time. And I believe this is really the first Rocky Mountain Cup that I could remember that the Colorado Rapids are probably going to be the favorites coming into this game. Well, actually, maybe last year you could say that the Rapids started to kind of take that power shift as them being the better Rocky Mountain team, because it's always been RSL the one that are the better team, and you can kind of see in the last 5 head-to-head matchup between both all of these teams where RSL has won most of them. But I kind of sense that there might be some power shift with the way that, you know, the last match between both of these teams, Colorado was able to win 5-0 against RSL, but also with the form that both of these teams have been in, which Colorado definitely have been in a much better form than what RSL is currently in right now. Because RSL right now, they drew 2-2 against the Galaxy at home, and that was a frustrating draw because, again, they were up 2-0 at home. And really, anytime when you're 2-0 at home and you drop points in that position, it's always going to be a very disappointing result. While for Colorado, they are unbeaten in the last 4 games, and as I mentioned, in the last 5 head-to-head matchup. But besides that rare 5-0 shenanigans that Colorado put against RSL, RSL has really owned this rivalry, winning 4-1 on the road against the Rapids, winning 2-0 at home against Colorado, winning 3-2 on the road against the Rapids before winning 6-0 on the road against the Colorado Rapids. And not to mention, RSL also have a very decent record against the Rapids in this Rocky Mountain Cup at Rio Tinto Stadium. And you could also say that the Rapids, they kind of treat Rio Tinto Stadium like a house of horror. But that was something that kind of all changed last year when they were able to win 5-0 and really kind of shocked a lot of people with the way that it's a place where they tends to always struggle, and they absolutely put a smacking and almost kind of give RSL a little taste of their own medicine with the way that they have beaten the Rapids badly in the past couple of years. But that being said, there is no doubt coming into this game the Rapids are going to be the better team. And again, I feel like there may be some power shift in terms of this Rocky Mountain rivalry where it's always been RSL the ones that's been the better team. But now with the Rapids playing much better soccer compared to RSL, they might be the one that fancy to get themselves all 3 points and be that team that is going to that potentially is going to win the Rocky Mountain Cup. Which, by the way, there's actually a trophy that is awarded for the team that wins the Rocky Mountain Cup. And last year it was the Rapids that actually won the Rocky Mountain Cup, despite the fact that it was both of these teams did win 1 match apiece in the Rocky Mountain Cup. The Rapids actually have a better goal differential, and that's the reason why they, of course, won the Rocky Mountain Cup trophy last year. But now moving on into the next match on this board is going to be the game that I'm going to be attending, which is the Quakes versus the Houston Dynamo, as this game will start at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff will be 7:08 p.m. local time. The Quakes, well, if you are an optimistic Quakes fan and you're a Quakes fan that maybe have a lot of low expectation for this team, you would say that they have been unbeaten in the last 3 games, and that the last 3 games that they've been on the road, where it's been kind of a murderous road with them playing against Minnesota, Colorado, and SKC, and that you could also say it's kind of remarkable the fact that they did not lose any of those games. And really, in general, it is very rare you see a Quakes go in that road of a stretch, let alone a murderous road kind of stretch, and they did not lose any of those games. Now, that being said, if you are a pessimistic Quakes fan, you would also kind of point out the fact that in the last 2 games, they of course lost a 1-0 lead to drew 1-1, and especially the last one was probably one of the most painful one, where they were leading 1-0 for the majority of the second half, only to give up that lead in stoppage time to drop points in that one. And you can also point out the fact that this team have not won since May, and they have, I believe, the longest winless run in MLS. I mean, I wrote that here, but I'm pretty sure maybe there are other team that has a long winless run, but I know for the fact that their winless run is now at 11 games, and as I mentioned, they have not won a game ever since they beat RSL on the road 2-1 all the way back in May. Now, that being said, Houston also have been having a long winless run too, because ever since that incredible start to the season, they have now gone winless in 7 games, and their record is 3-7-4, while the Quakes' record is 3-4-7. Now, in the last 5 games, I think this is the only matchup where you don't actually see any green that is put here in the last 5 games for both of these teams, because as I mentioned, both of these teams are combined winless in their last 18 games. For the Quakes, as I mentioned, they drew 1-1 against SKC before drawing 1-1 against the Rapids, then drawing 2-2 against Minnesota, but before that, it was a 3-1 loss against the Galaxy before losing 5-0 to Orlando City on the road. For the Dynamo, they had a very forgettable 0-0 draw against the Vancouver Whitecaps, and that, by the way, was the only game on Tuesday, and you kind of would be forgiven the fact that you forgot that there was actually a game that was happening on Tuesday, because from what I heard, that game was a very, very boring 0-0 draw between the Dynamo and the Whitecaps. But before that, they lost 2-0 to the Sounders before drawing 1-1 against FC Cincinnati, drawing 1-1 on the road against RSL before losing 3-2 against the Houston Dynamo. And you could also maybe say that this is kind of a must-win territory for both of these teams, and especially for the Quakes, where I think this is probably the best opportunity that they get a win. I mean, they playing against a struggling Dynamo team, and I know before the Quakes tends to not have a good record against the Dynamo, even when they're playing at home. But come on, this has to be the best opportunity for them to get a win. I mean, if they don't get a win in this game, then there could, I know that, as I say, a lot of optimistic fans will point out the fact that this team hasn't lost a game in a bit, and there's progress. But at some points, the next progress is to see those draws to turn into wins, and that, after all, wins is what gets you into the playoffs. Draws is not going to be enough to get yourself into the playoffs, and as I said, this is the best opportunity for them to get a win and finally end this 11-game winless run that they had in this one against the Houston Dynamo. And honestly, I also don't care if this is an ugly win and this turns out to be just a 1-0 result. In fact, I feel like that could be the case in this game because both of these teams have been struggling to score goals. But at the end of the 90 minutes, if the Quakes can get a win in the game, then yeah, maybe I'll start to say that things could start to return a little bit normal, and maybe they can go on that kind of typical Mateus Almeida run, where just as you thought that this team lost all hope, for whatever reason Almeida find that magic pixie dust to kind of transform this team and go on a good unbeaten run and get themselves back above the table, even though you thought that they were dead and buried. But now, moving on into the last game on this board, is LAFC versus the Vancouver Whitecaps. So the good news for LAFC in this game is that they're playing against a relatively weak team, and we know that when they do play against a relatively weak team, that means it's usually a game that they, of course, get the victory. Now, that being said, there is still that concern about how LAFC are still unable to beat teams that is above the playoff line and beat teams that they might have to face in the playoffs, and that was the case once again in the last one against the Timbers, where they lost 2-1 on the road. While Vancouver, as I mentioned, they were part of that forgettable 0-0 draw against the Houston Dynamo at home. And this game will start at 10:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Pacific, and the actual kickoff time will be 7:38 p.m. local time, and it will be the last game that will kick off in terms of the busy Saturday night action. The last 5 games for both of these teams, as I mentioned, LAFC are coming off a 2-1 loss against the Timbers. Before it was a 2-1 win against RSL, a 2-0 road win against Austin FC, a 1-0 road win against RSL, before losing 2-1 against SKC. For the Whitecaps, it was a 0-0 draw between both them and Houston, but they did win 2-1 against the Galaxy to end that miserable long winless run that they had. But before that, they lost 4-0 against RSL at home. Then it was a 2-2 draw between both of these teams, or 2-2 draw between them and FC Dallas, and then a 2-2 draw between them and the Seattle Sounders. And again, for LAFC, the good news for them is that they're playing a relatively easy team, and at least the reason why LAFC at least is able to get themselves in a playoff spot this season is that they've been able to beat teams that they're supposed to beat, which that's a good recipe for a team that is able to make the playoffs. But unfortunately for LAFC, this is a game where even if they get a win in this game, there's definitely going to be still doubters that's going to say, well, yes, they beat Vancouver, but until if they do play against a team that is going to be one that they're going to be facing the playoffs, then that could be an interesting tale to see whether or not if they are actually a true MLS Cup contender. But that being also said, you can only play against the team that's in front of you, and I have a feeling LAFC should be able to get all 3 points against the Whitecaps, especially the Whitecaps do not have a good history when they play against LAFC, especially on the road. In fact, it's been kind of a house of horror for the Whitecaps every time they have to play LAFC at Bank of California Stadium, because I think they have lost all of their matchup when they play LAFC at Bank of California Stadium. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for the preview in terms of these 8 games. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of these 8 games? And as always, let me know in the comments below your prediction for all 8 of these games. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.